Welcome back to part 2 of the Wood Elves Faction Army Guide. We've already taken a look at the roster and all the units that they have available. Now first of all we're going to look at some balanced army builds that you could bring against all the different factions, and then we'll move on to some tactics and things to think about when using the elves. Now, let's build some armies. So first up, oh scheisse, it's the Beastmen. What are we going to bring against these foul beasts of the darkness? Well, for my general, I'm going to go with something I think the Beastmen will struggle to take down, because their anti-large isn't that great. Their spearmen aren't really that good, and the ancient tree man's pretty tough. Minotaurs, of course, with great weapons, very dangerous. Gorbel, very dangerous, but if you can control those two things, this general is going to be pretty safe from the Beastmen. And then on top of that, he has non-armor piercing weapon damage, which is perfect for the Beastmen, and he has the Law of Life spell, so he can help buff your troops and keep them alive. Now for our front line, I'm going to go with Dryads, for two reasons. One, they can mitigate a lot of the Beastmen's damage, and two, they can do a lot of damage to the Beastmen because they don't have any armor. And the same is true of these War Dancers, very high damage output, and against the Beastmen with their lack of armor, they're going to get absolutely shredded by War Dancers. So I'll mix them in with the Dryads, and they should be able to kill a lot of the Beastmen and keep them held back. For our anti-large needs, we'll take a couple of Eternal Guard. No shields required. The Beastmen do have missile units, of course, but to be honest, they're not that great, and they can be easily dealt with by another part of the army, the missiles or the cavalry. Then I'm also going to have 2 units of Wildwood Rangers, who are going to be great for dealing with heavily armoured units, and monsters and cavalry. So all the most expensive Elven missile units have the ability to run away and still shoot their enemy in the face. But that's not much use against the Beastmen because they can all run just as fast as these guys, if not faster. So no need to bring any of them. Just a simple cheap Glade Guard should do. Bring some Hagbane tips to try and slow them down. That's going to give our archers a little bit more time to do a little bit of extra damage against these Beastmen because they have no armor. The missiles are going to do a lot of damage. Now on to our cavalries. We don't really need any shields from these Wild Riders because their missiles aren't really a problem for us. So we'll take 1 unit of regular Wild Riders. They should be able to deal with any Centaurs. And then I'm going to take some Glade Riders with Hagbane tips. Going to be great for slowing down the enemy Centaurs. And because the Centaurs lack armor, they'll be able to do some damage with their missiles in general. We have, however, gone over our budget though, so we'll remove a few random little spells that we don't really need. Don't need any armor piercing particularly. Missile resistance, not going to be too worried about that, so we'll get rid of that. Nearly there, 87. Something else. So all these replenishment ones and speed reduction ones are going to be pretty handy. Maybe we'll go with this one. It's not ideal because it does replenish, but it's given us our money. We've got a bit of change left over. So that's a good balanced build for fighting the Beastmen, I reckon. You've got plenty of infantry killing power in the Dryads, War Dancers and the Ancient Tree Man. Then you can deal with the large units with the Spears and Wildwood Rangers, and also the missiles as well. If you can slow down Minotaurs and focus fire on Minotaurs, get rid of them before they even reach the battle, that's going to help you out tenfold. Beastmen, Cavalry and Skirmishers can be dealt with by your Cavalry and Skirmishers, although you may have to be wary of numbers. So you may have to help out with missile units. Centaurs are very lightly armoured, so Glade Guard should be able to take them down fairly quickly too. So just watch your flanks and try to do as much missile killing power as you can, and you shouldn't suffer the wrath of the Beastmen. Now onto the Empire, a faction with great cavalry and a lot of options for their artillery. So I'm going to take a female Glade Lord and slap her on a giant eagle, so that she can A, avoid the enemy generals as they will probably kick the crap out of her, B, so she can attack the lightly armoured units with her eagle, and C, because she has this spell, the Prey of Anathema. It's a net spell, so it's going to hold units in place. Great for using on Reiksguard and Demigryph and those dangerous units. Hold them in place, hammer them with missiles. It also increases the amount of damage they take from missiles, so a great tactical spell to be used there. My front line, I'm going for Dryads. 3 units of those, they should be able to get through any swordsmen. A couple of units of shielded Eternal Guard because of the Empire Skirmishers. They're pretty good. They're of course going to deal with any large units the Empire has, mainly cavalry of course. And then I'm going to take 1 unit of War Dancers with Ash-Rise Spears specifically to go after the Demigryphs. And 2 units of Wildwood Rangers, again just to get after the cavalry and the large units. They can also go up against greatswords because they've got the armor piercing. For my missile units, I'm going to go pretty simple. 2 units of normal Glade Guard, 1 unit of armor piercing, and also 1 unit of Way Watchers as well, because again they have the armor piercing, so they can do a lot of damage to those incoming cavalries and also any greatswords. Now for my cavalry options, I've got quite a lot of money left, so I've got a few different ways I could go with it. But I think I definitely get some Hawk Riders because, as I said in part 1, they're an opportunistic hunter. So anytime that skirmishers are undefended, these guys can go in and get them nice and quick. And the same thing with artillery. They can also be good for stopping enemy cav charges. Obviously you don't want to charge into Demigryph units in the front, but if you charge them in the side or back, you'll stop them charging on your other units. I've still got some money left for one more decent unit. I'm going to go with the Spellslinger of Beasts to take advantage of some of the damage spells and the ability to spawn a Manticore. I can use that Manticore in the same way that I'd use the Hawk Riders. And I think that is my Empire killing army. I've got plenty of resources to deal with their cavalry, which is their biggest threat. Their infantry is okay, it's not terribly dangerous. Halberdiers can be quite dangerous, obviously great swords as well, but I think we have enough to deal with them. If the enemy brought a lot of halberdiers, I could use my magic and my missiles to try and whittle them down a bit, make them a little bit easier for my infantry to deal with. I could have even brought regular war dancers instead of Asserai spear ones, because they chew through swordsmen pretty damn easily, but you do have to watch out for the Empire missiles, of course. You could argue that having no cavalry is a bad idea. You may want to swap out the Way Watchers for a unit of Wild Riders. I'm not sure how they'd fare against the heavily armoured units of the Empire though, those cavalries are pretty tough. But overall, that army can deal with the Empire pretty comfortably. Now on to those Bretonnian fellows. So Bretonnia, obviously very horse heavy and spear heavy faction. I'm going to bring the female Glade Lord again for her net spell. Grail Knights are probably the most dangerous thing to me on this army, so if I can neutralise them with a bit of net and missile combo action, I should be able to get rid of them no problem. I'm going to bring a Waystalker as well. Going to be great for picking off the general and all the paladins that people tend to bring online at least. So a combination of those two with their arrows of Kurnus as well. They're going to deal damage to any silly generals who try to do a bit of early general gankery. And then onto the front line, Dryads will slap the shit out of Bretonnian spearmen every day of the week. And then I'm going to take one unit of War Dancers with Asserai spears, just the one. They're going to be mostly focused getting after the Grail Knights in case they get too close. Then I'm going to take one unit of regular Glade Guard and two armor piercing ones. The AP Glade Guard I'll be using in conjunction with the net spell to take care of any of their top cavalries. And then for the same cause I'm going to take two units of Wild Riders without shields to deal with their cavalries. Again, they're going to be focused on taking down the cavalries. Sisters of the Thorn also going to be great with all their speed reducing abilities. They can help out the Wild Riders, take care of Grail Knights and Knights of the Realm pretty comfortably. Then I'm going to take some Hawk Riders, going to try and get them after the skirmishers, try to slow them down a bit. And I think that's about it. Now this is a somewhat unconventional army build for facing Bretonnia, because you might think, oh, you want to bring a lot of spears against Bretonnia, which, well, you can. But because I'm going to dedicate all my cavalry and my skirmishers, or most of my skirmishers, to taking down their cavalry, and I've got the net spell, I've got quite a lot of stuff to deal with the cavalry. I don't need any extra spear units. But you could, if you wanted to, drop a unit of Wild Riders for a couple of units of Eternal Guard. But Wild Riders should do pretty well against Bretonnian cavalry in extended melee. Of course, you don't want them to take a charge. Avoid the Grail Knight charges at all costs, because they will destroy Wild Riders pretty easily if they get that in. So you need to find a way to avoid that, but still be able to get into contact with them. The net spell can be great for this. It'll completely neutralise their charge, and you'll be able to attack them and get a charge in yourself. So that can be a really great idea. Sisters of the Thorn, great for slowing them down, great for bringing the speed down. That's of course going to be useful for skirmishers again. Lots of time for the arrows to destroy them while they can only move at like half their speed. Hawk Riders are going to try and use them to distract the skirmishers and maybe even just suicide it into the skirmishers to buy the Dryads time to move up to get into the spears. If they do and they make contact and they can't be shot by missiles anymore, they'll be pretty safe because they will be able to get through those spearmen pretty comfortably, and then they can get into the missile units and voila! No more Bretonnia. Now on to the vampires. I'm actually going to use a build that someone suggested in a comment because it sounded like quite a cool build, so we're going to go with that. The general idea was to go quite heavy on the tree men, as the vampires don't have a ton of stuff that can deal with them. So we're going to go with Durthut for our lord, and it's said to bring 2 tree men, plural I guess, 2 of those, but instead I'm going to bring a forest dragon and just 1 tree man to mix it up a bit. I think the forest dragon's pretty strong. He's got the armor piercing, so he's going to really destroy any of those graveguard, those heavily armored dangerous units. And then we're going to front line it with a couple of units of treekin, just 2, and then a bunch of spears we can put on the edges and 1 in the back and reserve. They should be able to deal with any of the large units, the Crypt Horrors, the Vargolfs, whatever. And of course any cavalries that may come around the sides as well. They are armor piercing too, so they can do a little bit of extra damage against those heavily armored units if there are any. And we're going to go with the Branch Wraith as well for those replenishment spells. Really great at keeping the treekin alive, going to keep them in the fight, allowing the tree men time to smash the crap out of all the infantry. And because the vampires don't have great anti-large units, they've only really got skeleton spearmen and blood knights, we're going to take 3 units of armor piercing glade guard to deal with the blood knights. Their pure focus is going to be on blood knights. Once we get rid of them, they can look elsewhere, but the blood knights are the only real threat to the tree men. And once the blood knights are out of the way, there's not really a lot that's going to be able to stop the tree men very quickly. They're going to do a lot of damage before they finally go down, if they even go down. So another quite unorthodox army here. It's not your typical balanced build that I might have shown you, but I thought I'd mix these up a little bit, throw in some different styles of making your armies, and that can certainly be a dangerous build for the vampires to face. One thing you do have to watch out for though is the spawning of units that the vampires can do. They seem to do it a hell of a lot, especially online. People will spawn a unit of zombies in amongst your glade guard, and then that's of course going to stop them firing, and they're going to have to do a melee fight before they can actually start firing again. And if you're looking to line up some blood knights for a smash-in, but then you get intercepted by zombies, they're not going to be able to get the Blood Knights, and then you might be in trouble. So do be aware of that. If Lords come quite close, they're probably going to spawn a unit near your Glade Guard. So just hammer all your tree types into their infantry, get your skirmishers on their cavalry, get the spears on their large units, and get the Forest Dragon just destroying everything. It could be great for hit and run, fly down, hit a unit in the back and fly off again before they get hold of you. Armor piercing as well, going to be really dangerous. Could be great against Lords. Of course, be careful if the enemy has air superiority, say a general on a flying unit and then 2 units of Vargeist. Forest Dragon will probably get beaten up by that, so you want to stay away from that or try to land and get in a melee fight before they can really get into you, or hover around your skirmishers, and your skirmishers should be able to keep you safe. But there you have a potential vampire destroying build with the elves. That brings us to the Dwarves, a difficult faction for the elves to deal with. For the same reason as the Beastmen, we lack any armor, we don't have staying power. They have a lot of range capabilities to damage us on the way in, and when we do get there, we've got to try and last a fight through their armor. I tried many different builds to try and defeat a balanced dwarf army, but the only one that actually worked and I was able to win with was this one. Basically just a lot of Asrai spears, a couple of units of Waystalkers, and a couple of units of Wild Riders. I had a branch wraith to replenish units where possible and also do a little bit of melee damage. But like I said, this is the only build I could get to beat the Dwarves. For some reason, Asrai Spears do really well against Dwarves. I tried the same build, but with Wildwood Rangers. They, for some reason, couldn't pull it off. Maybe it's to do with the physical resistances, but hey, these ladies worked. I cycle charged my Wild Riders all over the place, just trying to smash around their skirmishers as much as possible. I sent my Way Watchers around the flanks and tried to shoot them in the back as much as possible. They've got armor piercing ammo, of course. And I tried to use my Lord to try and kite their general as much as possible. You can see at the end of it, the Asrai Spears had a lot of kills. Pretty much everything had a lot of kills actually. The Wild Riders did really well. You wouldn't think they would because they're not armor piercing, but they really did. Their charge bonus and stuff, charging around all over the place, they got a lot of kills. Way Watchers did their damage, so lots of killing power in this army. You can see this is a fairly substantial dwarf build, got a lot of good units in there. Although it is worth noting that there's no heroes in that dwarf army, which is a rare thing. Most armies will contain heroes. A runesmith can be very dangerous for the elves because it can buff their armor, make them even tougher. They can do spells to damage you. So maybe not the most fair build in the world, but you can see that you can do a lot of damage to the dwarves with certain elven units. Of course, the dwarves have magic defense, so a lot of the magical attacks that a lot of the elven units do kind of go to shit. And it's worth saying that Total War Warhammer is not created equal. The factions are not created equal. Some do better than others against each other. It's really just a mix and match situation, and the Beastmen and the Elves don't do well against Dwarves. It's not easy for them to beat the Dwarves. They're just at a disadvantage. It's just how the game is, and it's important to understand that, I think. If you're playing as the Elves against the Dwarves and you're losing all the time, it's not because you're terrible, it's because the Elves are at a disadvantage to the Dwarves. So keep that in mind, and there's a potential dwarf killing build. Now for the Warriors of Chaos. Similarly to the Dwarves, they have a lot of armor, so they can be tough to deal with, but their heavily armored units are typically very expensive, so it means that we can bring an expensive army to match them. I'm going to bring the almighty tree man that is Durthu. He can do lots of damage to their infantry because he is armor piercing. We'll have to be careful of the anti-large though, because their anti-large units are pretty strong. Halberds, chosen halberds, very dangerous units, so we've got to take care of them. But he's got the spells as well, so that's going to help too. For my infantry, I'm going purely Wildwood Ranger. They've got a lot of armor piercing, they're anti-large, so they can deal with pretty much everything that the Chaos has to throw at them. Chaos Spawns, Dragon Ogre Shaggoths, Chaos Warriors, Chosen. They're going to be the best ones to deal with it. They're not going to beat Chosen by any means because they lack the armor, but they are going to do a lot of damage because they're armor piercing. And then 2 units of Eternal Guard to protect our flank. Don't need any shields because they don't really have any ranged units. And then for my ranged units, I'm going to take 2 units of Armor Piercing Glade Guard and 1 unit of Hagbane Tips. Going to be great for slowing down great units like Chosen. I can hammer them with Armor Piercing Missiles and slow them down with the Hagbane Tips, and hopefully damage them a lot before they even reach my infantry. I've got money left over for 1 unit of Wild Riders. They're just going to be useful all over the board for dealing with their cavalry or hammer and anviling, perhaps. Then also I think it's useful to take Hawk Riders because they're in the air and they can shoot down. There's not a lot the Chaos can generally do about it. So a useful unit to have for various reasons. This army is going to be pretty good at chewing through the front lines of enemy units. You do have to watch out for things like Warhounds though. They will chew through your skirmishers like there's no tomorrow. So be careful of them, keep them in check. Durthu's going to be great for taking down those heavily armoured units. Chosen especially, very dangerous unit. So this army can be pretty offensively powerful. And because the Chaos usually only brings small armies because they're so expensive, we can pretty much just go head to head on the expensive infantry front and see who comes out on top. Gonna have to try and use some tactics, get the Wild Riders in for some rear charges, get those Hawk Riders in for some rear charges, get the skirmishers focusing on important units, but very capable Chaos beating army there. Greenskins now, and this is actually one of the factions that I had the most trouble with when I was testing out these builds. And Black Orcs were a main reason why, so I'm going to take Durthu because he's got the armor piercing abilities. The Ancient Tree Man could be a good call though because he has the replenishment spell, is going to be great for our front line, which is going to be 3 units of Treekin, a very tough unit, great for holding back the masses of the Greenskin army, as they do bring a lot of numbers generally, allowing you lots of time to try and hammer them with your skirmishers or get some war dancers around or anything like that. Anti-large, just 2 units of Eternal Guards, no shields. They do of course have some skirmishers, but they're not that great and people don't really seem to bring them that often, so we'll go with no shields for now. Then 2 units of Wildwood Rangers. These are going to be ideally to take down the Black Orcs, but they're not going to be able to do that alone. They simply can't stand up to them. They can also of course help with large units, trolls, Arachnaroks, whatever. Now just 1 unit of skirmishers for this army, the Swift Shiver Shards version of the Deepwood Scouts, the ones that fire 2 arrows at once. Great for kiting enemy units, great for bringing them down because they don't have a ton of armor, and trying to be more of a nuisance than a direct killing power. Our killing power is going to come from cavalry. We're going to go pretty cavalry heavy in this army, Wild Riders, no shields, and 1 unit of Sisters of the Thorn. These cavalry is going to do great against the relatively lightly armoured orcs. Hammer and Anvil is a must, that's why you've got the Treekin there to line them up, and then your Wild Riders to knock them down. Like I said, I found it pretty difficult to beat the Greenskins, to be honest. I was struggling to find a build. I tried a nice balanced build against their balanced build, couldn't beat them. So I had to start getting a little bit more elaborate with this Hammer and Anvil style build. So you can see here the kills. My Treekin did a fair amount of damage, but my cavalries, they got most of the kills. Everyone pretty much did their part in this one. Deepwood Scouts, they did really well. Durthu took down a bunch of fools. And if you look at the deployed numbers here, I've got about half the amount of units that the Greenskins had. Half. So sometimes less is more. So there you go, there's a bunch of builds. These are not the meta builds or anything like that, they're just my ideas that come out of my head, and I did test them all out. I tried each battle about 3 times with my specific build to see if they were actually any good against a balanced army of the enemy faction. So I know I'm not just making these builds and hoping that they work. That's why this video took a while to come out, is because I'm trying to make sure that the stuff I'm showing you is legit. All these builds are viable builds, but this is Total War. Who knows what the enemy's going to bring? In the campaign you can kind of see what the enemy's going to bring, but online you have no idea. So the enemy may bring something that will completely counter one of these builds, and this build will be near useless, but that's just part of the game, unfortunately. Anyway, let's get deeper into this Elven world. Now before we begin, I think it's worth saying that the Elves are just a hard faction to play, I think. If you're new to the game, or if you feel that you're not very good at the game, you may struggle with the Elves. For some reason, they're just tougher to use than other factions. It feels like they require more micromanagement than other factions for some reason. You have to be pretty quick with your mouse and pretty quick with your thinking to get the Wood Elves the opportunities that they need. You can't just charge all of your front line and all of your units into the back of your front line and have them fight it out that way and think you're going to win. That doesn't tend to work very well with the Wood Elves. They require maneuvers and they require strategy. Which is kind of the same as all factions, I suppose, but with the Wood Elves, because they're so brittle and they lack armor, you need to be careful with them. I think that's the difference. And don't panic, I'm not saying that if you're not very good at the game, that you're not going to be able to ever use the Wood Elves. It's just going to take some practice with them for you to understand how they work and to get good with them. It's not like picking up the Empire, who have a really balanced, easy to use faction. They're going to take some thought and they're going to take some practice. So stick with them, because if you can learn to wield them correctly and harness all their killing power that they have, they can be very dangerous and a very tough faction. So what's the foundation of the Elves in battle? Well, they can make very strong front lines. Treekin and Dryads make great frontline units. They can mitigate a lot of damage. They can deal a fair amount of damage themselves, but most importantly, they will last a long time. They're not going to crumble and run away straight away like Chaos Marauders or something. You can see here I've got 2 units of Treekin holding back 2 units of Black Orcs, some Swordsmen, a Goblin Big Boss, some Orc Boys. Absolute monsters at holding the line, quite literally. But what's that going to do for us? Well, it's going to allow our missile units, which are typically positioned just behind the front line, it's going to allow them a lot of time to fire their missiles without the worry of being overrun and smashed to pieces by units that break through the front line. So they can focus their missiles on incoming units from the flanks or any cavalries out wide, any units in reserve behind their front line, any generals back there, so giving you plenty of time to make use of one of your strengths, missile units. And then there's the advantage that this also brings to flanking. You're going to need some time for flanking because you can't always move up your good flanking units, namely your war dancers, because they may get obliterated by missiles or cavalry. And you can see in this clip the power of the war dancers flanking. All I've done is move my Treekin up and then flank around with the war dancers to hit them in the back, and most of this Beastmen army is running away. Granted, this is against the Beastmen who lack armor like we do, but against most lowly armored units on any faction, they won't last long with war dancers stabbing them in the back. If you charge them into the back of your front line and have them fight that way, you're not really taking advantage of their 48 speed. That 48 speed is there to be used for flanking, so make use of it where you can. If you are going to use War Dancers to flank, you have to be careful that they're not going to get shredded by missiles on their way in. Allowing them to take any kind of charge, whether it's from infantry or cavalry, is also a bad idea. If you're making a front line of War Dancers and charging it into the front line of the enemy, they're going to take far too much charge damage. Even from a unit with a low charge bonus, they're going to feel a lot of that damage. And it's going to take maybe a quarter to a half of their health off, way more than they can afford to lose. War Dancers should be looking for targets that are already fixed in place by other units. War Dancers aren't the only thing you can flank with, of course. Many of the other infantries can fill that role. Wild Rider Cavalry especially can be a fantastic flanking unit. They're a really dangerous cavalry. They've got a great charge bonus. They've got great melee skills. Their only downside is they are lacking the armor. So again, you have to be careful with them. Avoid the missiles, avoid the charges from enemy cavalries, and they should be all good, and they will get you a hell of a lot of kills. I think the point I'm trying to make here is damage avoidance. A lot of these units are very fragile, but they are very powerful. They're not like other factions where a lot of units can tank damage and take charges and take missiles to the face, and they can still kind of function afterwards. The elves can't really function afterwards. After all that extra damage, they can't handle it. You need to use various tactics and methods to try and control the enemy army. For example, if they've got some skirmishers, you could fly Hawk Riders into them to stop them firing while the rest of your army moves up, and then you've saved them some damage. You are going to sacrifice the Hawk Riders, but at least you've got the job done. You could use the extra range of your skirmishers. You've got 180 range, that's more than any other faction has. Use that extra 20 range to try and take out their skirmishers, and then you don't have to worry about your infantry taking that damage when they move up. There's tons of different ways you can do things, different tactics, different methods. I can't list them all in one guide, that would be ridiculous, but that's the beauty of Total War. Experiment yourself, try things out. You'll find things that work and you'll find things that don't. That's how anyone gets good. Dividing the enemy army really caters for the elves playstyle too. If you can break the enemy army up into several different parts and dispatch them that way, it's much easier than trying to deal with one big massive army who are all collectively defending each other. If you can use Wild Riders to try and lure other units away from the front line, or you could bring missile units out to the flanks and try to draw enemy infantry to chase them, again just dividing the army and taking them apart piece by piece rather than as one big thing as you might do with most factions. All these different tactics that you have to try and do are of course going to add to your micromanaging load, but this is what I was talking about when I was saying they take a lot of micromanaging. It's because you have to try and do a lot of things at once, and if you don't, or if you slip up, you may take some unnecessary damage that could cripple one of your best units. So that is pretty much the elves, I think. I realise I may have made them sound really daunting to play with the way I've just spoken about them, but honestly, a bit of practice with them, understanding which units can get away with what, you should be just fine getting used to the elves. Just remember, tree units are really tough, the extra missile range is really useful, try to avoid as much unnecessary damage as possible, and pick that enemy apart. Okay, how about I give you an example battle. So here I've got my Elven army and I'm going up against the Empire. It is against the AI, so it's not going to be terribly difficult, but you can get the idea from this. We are going to go pretty quick, so listen up. First order of business, the artillery has been left exposed. My Hawk Riders are all over it, so that's one threat neutralized. I've just dropped a net spell on the approaching demigryphs so they can't move, and I've got my 2 missile units hammering away at that already. They've done a net spell on my Dryads, and I don't want to move my front line up with a big hole in it, so I'm going to hold them back for now and let them approach a bit until that wears off. My Hawk Riders found another opportunity. They're now pestering all the skirmisher units, preventing them from doing damage to my incoming units. The Reichsguard on the right here, I've lured them into a cav spear trap. I've got them to engage my spearmen, and I'm now going to move my Wild Riders round. Front line starting to engage now, with my flanking units preparing and moving to the left. I've also managed to create this hole just here. I moved one of my Dryads off to the right a bit to engage the unit that was coming, and it's created a hole that's perfect for my War Dancers to sneak through. The Reichsguard are about to be hammered by my Wild Riders. You can see I've avoided the Reichsguard damaging charge and got my charge on them instead. Hawk Riders are still pestering the skirmishers, and my flanking units have arrived, so these War Dancers are going to get into the back of all these units and utterly destroy them. Going to get the Asteroid Spears after the demigryphs, what's left of them. These War Dancers are coming around for a nice flanking attack now. Going to send the Wild Riders through the gap, and everything is looking pretty rosy. Got my skirmishers firing on an exposed spear unit. On the left, the flanking attack continues. The War Dancers have pretty much completely enveloped this left-hand side now. This is all thanks in big part to the Hawk Riders that have been pestering the skirmishers. Without them, they would have done a lot of damage to these War Dancers on the way in. The Reichsguard have just routed, and the Light Wizard is now getting his face kicked off by the Wildwood Rangers. And the units on the left are now completely doomed. So a pretty comfortable destruction of the Empire. The key here has been these Hawk Riders, keeping the skirmishers from firing. We did well to keep the Reichsguard under wraps as well. So hopefully from this you can see some of the things I was trying to talk about. Damage avoidance, having your front line last a long time where you flank round, etc, etc. If I'd let their missile units fire on my War Dancers, they probably would have got destroyed on their flank. If I'd let the Reichsguard charge into my Wild Riders, they probably would have lost that fight. So there's some things to think about with the elves. Lastly, let's talk about the forest. It's often been pushed by Creative Assembly that the elves can be better used in the forest. If you don't know, when Elven missile units are in the forest, they get 150% accuracy. This sounds like it would make them really powerful, except they shoot a lot of trees. You can see all the arrows on the floor, on numerous trees here. So I did some testing. I had 2 units of the same type, one inside the trees and one outside the trees, both firing at the same unit. The ones inside the trees with their 150 accuracy only got 25 kills. The ones outside got twice as many at 50 kills. So it seems that extra accuracy counts for nothing, as half the arrows hit trees. I then tried the same thing, but having the unit on the edge of the forest. You can see this unit is hidden, so it means they are in the forest. So they are getting their 150% accuracy bonus. So does this accuracy make any difference when there's nothing in the way to block all the arrows? The answer is no, not really. The Glade Guard outside the trees got 31 kills, while the ones on the edge of the forest got only 34 kills. 50% accuracy for 3 extra kills. Frickin' pointless. So I wouldn't really bother trying to fight with the elves in the forest, because it doesn't really make that much of a difference. So there you have it. The elves, not an easy faction to play, but if you can learn to wield them with a bit of practice, you can become pretty dangerous with them. So don't give up on the elves just yet if you already have. That doesn't make sense. Either way, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you all in the future. Unlike these elves.